the origin of decision making? Who kind of was in charge?
That is established long before launch. Am I fully prepared in the position in extremis to make the right call on a situation? If I'm not, I need to get there. You can either shift the mindset or you can fret.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership, why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and as always, thanks for spending time with us as we explore what truly drives great leadership. Today's episode is about one of the most difficult and most revealing moments a leader can face, the moment when plans break down and uncertainty becomes the operating environment. We spend a lot of time teaching leaders how to plan, how to execute, how to optimize, but the essence of leadership is demonstrated when the original plan no longer fits reality. My guest today knows this terrain as well as anyone on the planet, or off for that matter. Joining me is Captain Butch Wilmore, a retired NASA astronaut and fellow alumnus of Tennessee Tech University, who recently experienced an unplanned extended stay from June 2024 to March 2025 aboard the International Space Station. In spaceflight, there is no margin for panic, no room for denial, and no luxury of pretending that the original plan still applies. When circumstances change, leaders are tested not on certainty, but on how they make sense of uncertainty and operate successfully within it. That's exactly what today's conversation is about. Butch, thank you for joining me on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Very kind of you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you.
Well, leadership is often described as decision-making, but before decisions can be made, something more fundamental has to happen. We have to answer a quieter, harder question. What is actually happening right now? In complex, high-stakes environments, that process is called sense-making, the ability to interpret incomplete information, update mental models, and help others stay oriented when certainty disappears. Today, we're going to explore what sense-making looks like when the timeline is unclear, the consequences are real, and the mission has changed midstream. Butch, before we dive into our discussion, for those listeners who maybe haven't heard about your harrowing experience with Suni Williams aboard the International Space Station, in a couple of sentences or so, can you set the scene by sharing what the plan had been and what actually turned out to happen?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Sunday night launched. It was the first crewed flight of the Boeing Starliner. It was a test mission. And where our task was to sort of ring it out on the way to space station, the things you do after launch and prior to docking, and then on board the space station to be docked for several days. There's thermal tests we do and various other things we do with the spacecraft just in that quiescent mode, we call it. And then undock, other tests as we're heading down, getting towards the deorbit burn, again, ringing it out, first flight. And then the deorbit burn itself, entering the atmosphere and all the way down to parachutes and then landing. That was the plan. And the launch went well. The first day of tests went really well. The spacecraft was very maneuverable. It was very responsive to all of our inputs. The tests that we had planned for all went out without a hitch, had no issues. And like I said, the spacecraft performed remarkably well. Day 2 was rendezvous day. The tests themselves, part of the test, of course, is rendezvous itself. There was going to be some manual control. There had been a lot of manual control the day prior. There's going to be several opportunities to do some manual control and assess the spacecraft flying qualities. But before we even got to that, we lost a thruster, and I'm making this very short for you. As we're approaching the docking axis, we lost a second thruster. And then as we got on the docking axis, I'm manual control by this point, we lost a third thruster, and then we lost a fourth thruster. And what that resulted in, they were all the same direction. They fired to the aft. And with those 4 losses, we lost the ability to fully control all 6 degrees of freedom. And very briefly, pitch, roll, and yaw. That's attitude. And then translation, forward and aft, up and down, and left and right. That's translation. So put all those together, that's 6 degrees of freedom. Well, we lost the ability to go forward. And because of those thrusters we lost, the pitch and the yaw was dramatically degraded as well. So we lost that capability. Again, the short story is we wound up getting a couple of thrusters back. We lost a 5th thruster, which took us back to zero fault tolerance for loss of 6 degree of freedom control. And then eventually we got enough thrusters back where we were able to dock successfully, and then the stay from that point. So we trying to surmise, would we come back on Starliner? I'll talk about that in a little bit. And decided we wouldn't, and we stayed for much longer than planned. That is the overall summary. Came back on a SpaceX Dragon. So that's hopefully the listeners that aren't familiar, they're up to speed now.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now that we have that backdrop, I'd like to start at the moment when you realized this mission was not going to unfold as planned. Without getting too technical, what did it really kind of feel like when it became clear that your stay aboard the International Space Station might be significantly longer than expected?
Yeah, well, Sonny and I both were, we both went through U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. I instructed at the school and also was an instructor for a period at Air Force Test Pilot School. before NASA selected me as an astronaut. We both had vast experience in flight tests. We knew there's no test, certainly no first flight of anything, an aircraft or spacecraft. This was only the sixth first flight of a spacecraft in U.S. history. You had Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, the shuttle, the SpaceX Dragon, and then this one. So this was number 6 of first flight. And we knew that we would find some things. There was no doubt that we would find things. You always do. I heard a reporter on CNN say, well, they said they knew they'd find stuff. Why did they launch? Well,
That's how it works.
you can't get it perfect. Any flight. This is just someone that's saying something. I understand why he would say that maybe, but he doesn't understand what flight test is. You're going to find things. Certainly we did not expect to find what we found, what happened. Again, kind of step our way through it. We lost the first thruster. There had been a couple of uncrewed flights of the Starliner before, and there had been thruster losses. And as we go through this, make sure your listeners understand. You have the crew module where the crew is, and you have a service module attached to the crew module. And the service module has thrusters on it, and the crew module has thrusters on it. The crew module thrusters are not used until you are at the very end of the mission and when you're setting up to re-enter the atmosphere after the service module's gone. So this is all service module thrusters we're talking about. You go through the mission, the service module controls the spacecraft, and you do a deorbit burn where you slow down so you start to re-enter the atmosphere. You detach from the service module burns up in the atmosphere, and the crew module is what returns. So what we're talking about is service module thrusters. In the previous flights, of course, they had a couple of thrusters fail, but you don't get the service module back. It burns up in the atmosphere. So you cannot inspect it and say, oh, this is what happened. Yeah, that's what happened. That's why that thruster failed. So you have to downlink as much data as you have and do an engineering analysis and determine what your best guess is what caused the failure, because you can't inspect it, right? So we'd had these failures on the previous missions. We knew about those. So when we lost the first thruster, it's not good to lose a thruster, but since we'd lost several previously on the previous missions, didn't seem like that big of a concern at the time. And I'll just briefly step through the thruster losses. So as we're approaching, the space station is traveling at 17,500 miles an hour around the globe, right, as it's orbiting. So we're traveling the same, but we're working our way up from beneath the space station. It is the passive vehicle. We are the active vehicle. And we're working our way up to eventually get in front of it and then rendezvous to dock. So we're below 600 meters. Around in here, we lose a thruster, that first one. We get up almost to the docking axis. We lose a second thruster. You lose that first thruster, redundancy. We have redundancy built into our systems. So we are what we call dual fault tolerant, meaning we can have two failures in most all of our systems, dual fault tolerant, and you can still maintain whatever that control capability that system is, right? So we lose the first aft firing thruster. We're still dual fault tolerant, not a big deal. Coming up towards the docking axis, we lose that second thruster. That's a bigger deal. Now we've lost a level of fault tolerance. We're down to single fault tolerance to maintaining this 6th degree of freedom control that I talked about. And so I'm thinking at that time, maybe, I'm not sure, it's all the automated system. Maybe I need to take manual control, and I know eventually we're going to try to get these thrusters back. As we get on the docking axis, mission control, backs up what I'm already thinking. I haven't said anything to them, but they say, yeah, take manual control. So I take manual control. At that point, we lose a third thruster. Now we're zero fault tolerant to maintaining 6th degree of freedom control. And the precise control I had experienced the day prior was not there. It was not precise. It was a challenge to maintain exactly. And so everybody will understand. I hope I'm not getting too long here, but we had to maintain our attitude at looking at the space station, because there are sensors on the spacecraft that actually see the space station. Cameras, IR sensors, LIDARs that actually build a digital picture of the space station. So if we break that lock with the space station, if we're not looking at it, if we break the lock, all that goes away and you can't get it back in time to rendezvous and dock on this sequence. We'd have to leave the space station. So I got to maintain the attitude. I need to maintain my position. And that was challenging, even with 3 thrusters down. And then we lost the 4th thruster. Now we lose that 6th degree of freedom, full 6th degree of freedom control, and it's even more challenging. At this point, we're working with mission control, obviously, and we're trying to see if we can get some thrusters back. And so they said, maintain your attitude, maintain your position. And then when it gets up to time to try to see if we can get some thrusters back, we have to send some test firing signals to those thrusters. Because what has happened is there's a lot of sensors that are measuring the thrust levels and everything on these thrusters. And what's happened is something has gone awry. We're not sure what, but the computer has said, oh, you're not functioning correctly. I'm taking you out. So that's why these thrusters are failing. They're failing off. The computer's saying, nope, you're not performing sufficiently. We're taking you out. And so that's what had happened. We lost that 4th thruster. Again, control's challenging. Some of your listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with orbital mechanics. I'm visualizing orbital mechanics, meaning what will this control input do, orbital mechanics-wise, how two spacecraft rendezvous, one a little lower, a little higher, how it maneuvers. I'm thinking through this process because I've lived this for so long. what this control input will do to orbital mechanics as far as maintaining this position and attitude that we're talking about. Again, going through the process, and then the mission control says, okay, now you got to maintain your attitude, maintain your position, and don't touch anything. Because if I'm putting control inputs in while they send these test signals to these thrusters to fire, they're not going to know the response, because they're going to fire that thruster, see what the spacecraft does, guidance, navigation, control in response to that, to see and assess what the thrust level is. And so I can't touch anything. So I've got to maintain attitude and position and touch nothing, which is not easy.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's just little drift, maintain. Okay, I'm hands off. They send the signal to the thruster. It fires. I keep my hands off for a period. I got to get hands on eventually because I got to maintain attitude. And this is the way we assess, okay, is that thruster putting out any thrust at all, enough thrust to put it back into the mix? And as we bring these thrusters back in, the software that would pull it out again, fault detection, indication response, FITR, we call it, we cancel the FITR for that one. So now that thruster, the thrusters we bring back on, won't fail. Even if they should fail, we have to have them. And there's a lot going through my mind through all this, but without getting too technical, like you said, but so that people understand. Eventually, like I said, we got a couple of thrusters back, moved in a little closer, lost that fifth thruster. Thankfully, we didn't lose the fifth thruster while the other four were down. I'm not sure what would have happened then. It's hard to ascertain exactly. Could I have controlled? I hope so, but I'm not sure. But fortunately, we didn't. By the God's grace, we didn't. Eventually got thrusters back enough to where we got docked to space station. So again, that's a little bit more in depth, and what's going through my mind, I guess we'll get to that as we go forward.
It seems like you were focused on this task at hand. Was anybody thinking what happens after this? Like, how do we get back? Are we going to be functional to de-dock or return or that sort of thing?
Okay. I was already thinking that, because so that's what happened. Now, what's going through my mind? So through this whole process, because I'm on the controls and I understand, I can feel how difficult it is to maintain control. I'm thinking, okay, we got to dock. We have to dock. In this condition, again, not knowing the future at that point, could we get these thrusters back? Not knowing. In this condition, I'm not sure we can do a deorbit burn. I'm not sure I can maintain enough control to do a deorbit burn in this condition. Now, we have a mode that's called backup mode, and it doesn't even go through the computers. There's a separate computer called an integrated propulsion controller, an IPC, that has basically a digital lookup table. And it says, oh, he puts in that control input, fire that thruster, and that one. And it's kind of a lookup table. And there's two of these, tables, and we've got a system, so backup. I'm pretty sure, and again, I'm thinking it even real time. To get back to Earth, we might have to go into backup, because I don't know what's wrong with these thrusters. Will we ever get them back? So we have to dock. That's the first thing. If we don't dock, I'm not sure. It's not going to be pretty. So we have to dock. And I'd already thought so we'll talk about this as we go, but if we do dock and we're able to get successfully docked, I'm not sure we're coming home on this spacecraft, because again, like I described earlier, you don't get the hardware back. You can't put on your white spacewalking suit and go outside and inspect the thrusters. They're not designed to be inspected in space. So there's no way we're going to go out and find out, inspect them and see what might have happened. So again, already thinking through this whole long process, because I've been at this a long time. Got to dock. If we don't dock, it probably won't be pretty. If we do dock, I'm not sure we're coming home in this spacecraft. All that's gone through my mind already. So
let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. I'm curious, at what point did you realize this was not just a logistical adjustment, was not just the technical issue of the thrusters, but really had to shift your mental model of the mission itself? At what point did that occur?
It started out there in front of the space station before we docked. Like I said, the mental model, that's a big part of it. I've got to go back, way back to when I was at Tennessee Tech. And while I was there, and I'm trying to get into the Navy, and I played football, I had blew out my knee, I had anterior cruciate repair, and the Navy initially said, no, we're not taking you, we can't handle that. And I'm like, well, I played football on this repaired knee. What do you mean? And it was just a long process. The mental model, like you're talking about, is a long process to get into the Navy. It seems like nothing in life is easy, nothing. And so shifting that mental model is just basically kind of what takes place as you go through life and going through flight school, and eventually what aircraft I would select, and going through that process of going to an aircraft that I wasn't initially wanted to fly, but turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. So these shift in your mindset has taken place many times over the years, and then eventually deployments and operating around on the aircraft carrier. And that is one of the most dangerous environments on the planet. I mean, it's very dangerous on the deck of an aircraft carrier, with aircraft turning and blowing and props are turning, and aircraft are going into afterburner on the catapults, and the jet blast deflectors are coming up, and always head on a swivel. I mean, this is constant awareness, peak awareness, every moment you're on the flight deck, and your responsibilities as far as making sure that you do the right thing in your aircraft when you're getting to the catapult and after you land, and all the procedures in flight, and things happen and things don't go as planned in flight, and you lose an engine. Thankfully, hopefully you're in an airplane that has two of them. Still got one. If you got one, you're in a heart locker. And into combat, and things don't always never goes as planned in combat, because the enemy surprises you, and you got reloaded all of their ammunition. And when you think there's not nothing going to be there, and then the whole world below you erupts with AAA and missiles and non-expected, so you got to shift immediately right there. So this is, like I said, I got to go way back, and this is kind of the process of the professional life that the Lord has put me through and put me in to actually prepare me for that situation. Because when you get to things changing in space, in a spacecraft that gets sick, you've dealt with things your whole career, and this is just another one of those things. And in the moment, listen to some of your podcasts before, in the moment you have to adjust now. There's no time to assess. You have to, and hopefully your preparation has been such that it has prepared you to handle those situations that are unexpected, that are life-threatening. And there's just some professions that deal with it more than others, and certainly people deal with various things, everybody in all walks of life all the time. So it kind of plays in.
Yeah, thanks for expanding on that. In leadership terms, that mental model shift is usually, sort of updating how you're understanding reality, is the core of what's referred to as sense making. So when the plan breaks down from your perspective, do you think it's more dangerous for leaders to move too slowly or to move too quickly before understanding what really has changed?
It's a great question. And my wishy-washy answer, it's situation dependent, right? Mm-hmm. There are times in leadership where I need to step back and I need to assess what's taking place, especially if you're dealing with people, obviously. If you're dealing with situations, most situations are dealing with people too. But if you're dealing with people specifically, issues in their lives, issues with their work, sometimes it's to make sure you assess, get all the information, right? You don't want to make a rash decision without being fully informed. And sometimes we see that even in the media. We see things that are done and said that are really done and said without being fully informed, and you don't want to do that. But other situations, like out in front of the spacecraft, out in front of the space station, on the we call it the V-bar, the velocity vector. So out on the V-bar, and things are not going well, you got to act now. And like I said earlier, you have to hope that you have to rely on your preparation even if it's insufficient. Your preparation is what your preparation is, right?
You got what you got.
And that's why going into this mission, first flight of a spacecraft, there's a fair amount of responsibility. I mean, this is, like I said, the sixth in the history of human spaceflight. There's 6 spacecraft that NASA has fielded and launched with humans on board. And there's a great responsibility there. And I was not going to not be prepared because you're literally on the world stage. Not that everybody watches, but certainly if things don't go right, there's a lot more eyes that'll watch, right? And so our preparation, I'm fortunate to have a great rendezvous officer, the primary rendezvous officer, Ray Biggins, and we worked together, mostly him and his team, but I was a part of it as well, developing the rendezvous and the profile and the things and the way we go about rendezvousing and docking with this spacecraft since it was new. That's all part of the process. And we spent, I can't say thousands, it was definitely hundreds of hours, probably over 1,000, just in the simulator, assessing, wondering, practicing. We never came up with this scenario, losing simultaneously 4 F-firing thrusters, but all types of things in preparation for this mission. I mean, we'd even go in, he's a volunteer fireman, and he'd say, hey, I get off shift at 5:30 Saturday morning. Let's go to the sim. And we meet at 6 a.m. on Saturday and go into the sim and do whatever, do things. Preparation. So your preparation in the fray of battle is what your preparation is. And you better be prepared, especially in scenarios like this, the first flight of a spacecraft. You need to be adequately prepared for that. And whatever your walk of life is, if you're going into combat, that leadership, I keep using these military models because that's what I know.
Sure.
But certainly that type of thing. And then, there's combat and business. There's, high stakes and things that are going on in business as well. And preparation, first off, you got to be committed. Commitment breeds the preparation, because in most situations in leadership, you have a great responsibility. So the commitment's got to be their commitment level, which breeds for the preparation, which, like I said, feeds into the responsibility that we have and that we share. And like I said, in situations like that, preparation. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's situational dependent. And especially in those situations where you got to act now, you need to be prepared.
One of the things that research consistently shows clearly is this mental model shift, the sense-making idea. isn't just about analysis, but it's about emotional regulation, which, as I'm saying that, it's striking to me because you're talking about, in all seriousness, you're talking about an event that happened in June of 24 that in a very real way could have meant you never returning to Earth. And you're just kind of talking about it as if it's just like another day at the office, and so this idea of emotional regulation, it's very clear to me that you either inherently have that or through all the training and preparation that you discussed, you've developed that over time. When leaders become anxious, that anxiety, it spreads, right? It spreads through themselves, through the teams they're working with. And when leaders stay calm, which you are demonstrating, not necessarily intentionally, that calm spreads too.
I don't know how many of your listeners, know the Bible, God's word, but David, if you ever read the story in Samuel about when he went forward against Goliath, the boy and the giant, David and Goliath, he went with full confidence. He had, the Lord had put him in situations where he had battled lions and bears. And he said, just like this lion and this bear, the Lord gave them to me, he's going to give you to me. Fully confident in what his task was. And he basically, as a child, a young man, very young, not even old enough to join into the military, he led that group against Goliath and he slew that giant because he was confident. Any task that we have, if we go into it without confidence, and again, your preparation breeds or helps that confidence level. But if you go into any situation not confident, especially if you're the leader, that's going to be sensed by everybody around you. And you don't want to go in with false confidence, but you certainly, in that model of David, based on what he had seen and what had transpired in his life prior, he was confident. I mean, completely, I will have your head on a platter today. He didn't say that exactly, but in a sense, confident in what his task was at hand. You can't go in shy. So you think about, you say, I'm saying this nonchalantly. And really, honestly, in the moment, it wasn't nonchalant. I'm thinking through the whole process. As like I said, if we don't dock, this is not going to be pretty. But, in the light of my Lord and what the Lord had brought me through, and I have full confidence in his strength and his power in this life that I'm living, that he gives me the breath. John 3:27 says, a man cannot receive even one thing unless it is given to him from heaven above. And ultimately, this whole situation, because our Lord is sovereign, he's the one who put me there, and I'm going to go forward with full confidence. I'm not going to step into a situation that I'm not prepared, and have confidence and move forward with our decisions. And hopefully that preparation has fueled and given us the ability to make those right decisions when those situations come up that are unexpected and are life-threatening. I think there's many people and many events a long time that we look back, and I think that's what you see in those individuals. You see a commitment level that fuels their preparation, and they understand the responsibility, and that breeds confidence in the moment, especially when things don't go well.
Thanks for sharing that. That informs so much of how you got through that process, that event or series of events, this experience, really. Then the shift of once you actually made it into the space station, and it's, as I recall thinking, because Tech was putting out all this information, right? It's like, oh my goodness, Tech alum, and then stuck in space kind of thing, and the emotional regulation and sense making, thinking about that required, where you were supposed to be up there for a couple of days or what have you, and now suddenly it's months. I know that there's transparency with regard to communication between NASA and the folks in space, but here on Earth, it was very much like, hey, these folks may never make it home, and so how intentional did you have to be, Captain Williams as well, but in managing your emotional reactions, in interacting with her, with the team on the ground, with the constant, as I recall, the constant media attention that you were getting, and you were both gracious about that. You're interviewing and talking to folks, but how did you regulate your emotions during that time where there are all these demands, and some place in your mind, whether it's the back, the front, the side, whatever, I may never set foot on the Earth again. Like, how did you regulate that?
Once we got to space station, once we were safely docked, that making it back to Earth really never entered my mind. I knew we'd come up with a plan. That's what we do, right? We come up with a plan regardless of, we were, the most likely scenario had us getting back in June of 2025. We made it back in March. Some things happened and things changed, but the most likely scenario, it was going to be a full year. And again, even the stay, and again, you're going to hear the same theme, preparation. Mm-hmm. We prepared for a long duration mission on the space station. And we actually pushed for it, Sonny and I. We got certain levels of training because initially we weren't sure how long the mission was going to be, what the plan was. It fluctuated over the years as Starliner got delayed. But we pushed and said, hey, we don't know what's going to happen. We need to be fully certified to do all the maintenance that has to be done on the space station, because there's a lot of it. We need to be fully certified to operate the robot arm, because there's different functions where you need to do that. We need to be fully certified to do spacewalks, because you don't know what scenario may have us where we'll be going outside for whatever, any number of different things. And we kind of pushed all of that. And again, being prepared, being committed, being prepared, because there's a great responsibility is kind of the theme there as well. And we did extra training and did extra things to make sure that we were in a position that if we wound up being on space station for an extended period of time, that we would be ready and just simulate right in like a normal space station crew. Now, we did have the benefit. Both of us had been commanders of the space station before. We'd spent long duration. We knew what life was like on the space station. So we had that benefit, which helped to minimize some of that training, obviously, that we would have normally had to have. So we had that background and that experience level, which played into it. But as far as assimilating, I mean, people don't know this, and it's not a big deal, but that they should. But there's 4 crew quarters on the space station. There's modules, and there's one on top, bottom, port, and starboard. Around in this one little section in Node 2. And that's all there is. When we got there, they were full. There was one kind of makeshift crew quarters in Columbus module that Sonny took. And then I just went into the corner of the Japanese experimental module, the GEM, in the corner. And not even inside of a rack or anything. I couldn't close the door. It was just out in the open in the corner. And I lived there for four and a half months of the almost 10 months we were up there, just hanging out in the corner.
Hopefully your rent was cheaper.
Yeah, cheap rent. They made me, we got sleeping bags that would, kind of strap you so you don't just float around. You don't want to be floating around the space station everywhere. So you strap it to the bulkhead. And so I'd sleep in my sleeping bag, and I'd have to roll it up and put it away in a bag every day because it's an operating module. Now on the weekends, when we weren't doing science and such in there, I'd leave my sleeping bag up and kind of make a wall and kind of get my little, happy place, if you will. And that's important too. That's important when you're shifting in this mindset, like you said. You need to have a place of solace, a place where you can have your stuff, your computer, a picture here or there, whatever, your toothpaste, your toothbrush handy. You need to have those type of amenities. And I just built it in the corner of the module, like I said, because that's all I had. So you make do. Now, if you compare that to people that get stranded for whatever reason in the jungle or out in, in the desert, I mean, this is good living. It's really good living compared to that. But it's not, secluded in where I can shut a door and have my own, the crew quarters are, I jokingly say they're about the size of a large coffin, right? You got enough place to hang out in your sleeping bag, and you got a computer there that you can right in front of you, but they're not huge, but it's your space. And eventually I got into a crew quarters after the crew that was there when we got there. When they left, I went into a crew quarters, obviously, and stayed there for several months until the next crew was coming. And then I moved out again back into the Japanese experimental module. Anyway, so this whole mindset shift is something that you have to do. You can either shift the mindset or you can fret. And what does fretting do? Absolutely no good whatsoever. There's no benefit to that. So why would I fret over something? You make do. You got lemons, you make lemonade, that old saying, and you just make do with what comes and what you have, and enjoy the experience. I'm not going to live my life bummed out because of this or bummed out because of that. I'm going to try to live my life realizing that the Lord is in control. And I can give you a scenario, an example, if you'd like it, from Scripture. But He's in control regardless of the situation, and I'm content. That breeds contentment, right? So we came up fully prepared. All that transpired and all that happened had nothing to do with us. We were just a result of just the way it played out. And the way it played out for us was that extended stay, and you make the best of it and you enjoy it while you're there. I mean, space is not a bad place to be, that term again, stuck, stranded. It's not a bad place to be stuck or stranded. It's so unique. The views are pretty amazing.
Out of this world, as it were.
Indeed. Because over the course of time, I mean, the Earth is rotating below us, and our orbit, it's pointing at a star that's way, way, way out there. So our orbit never changes as far as our orbit, but the Earth is going around the sun, right? And it's rotating underneath our orbit. So we see different parts of the Earth at every time, every day. We're going around every 90 minutes, 17,500 miles an hour. So every 90 minutes we circle the Earth, but the Earth is rotating under, so you see new sights, and you get to a point where, I mean, the whole globe between positive 51.6 degrees and negative 51.6 degrees, that's where the orbit is. Mm-hmm. I'd peek out the window and know where I was at over the whole globe. The 17th time I saw Lake Titicaca going by was just as exciting as the first, because it's that amazing to look down and see and experience. So yeah, you adjust. Yeah, it's not the plan. There's nothing that I could do to change the situation, so I'm not going to fret over it. Would I like to be there now, vice here? No, here's where I prefer to be. But in situations that you can't control, you go with it, you make the best of it, and fretting does you no good. And that's kind of been the mindset.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that and sharing some of what it's like to be up there on the space station with regard to looking out, seeing the Earth and all the different things there. And I think probably gives you a different perspective on what it means to be human and so forth. But I think this is a good place for me to pause and try to connect what we're talking about here with the scientific studies that have been done on leadership and teams. And so one of the foundational scholars in this area is Carl Weick, and he studied how people make sense of uncertainty and ambiguity in high risk environments like the space station and flying a fighter jet off of carriers and things like that. But Weick's work showed that sense making is not about finding the right answer. It's about updating your understanding of reality as new information emerges. So in other words, effective leaders don't cling to the original plan. They continuously revise their mental model of what's happening. So I can hear that in your voice. I mean, in a sense, you have done that for so long and it's so ingrained that it just seems logical to you that, well, this happens, our module dysfunctions and we're stuck in space, and that just happens, and we're going to roll with it. And the ability to do that is really important from a leadership standpoint and within scholarship. And then building on the work that Weick had done individually, he and Kathleen Sutcliffe studied what they called, and you're familiar with this term, high reliability organizations, groups like aircraft carriers, air traffic control centers, nuclear power plants, complex surgical teams. And they found that teams that perform well under uncertainty share a few critical behaviors. First, they stay alert to small warning signs. Hey, this thruster has gone out. 2, they resist oversimplifying explanations. 3, they defer to expertise rather than rank. 4, they work hard to maintain a shared understanding of the situation. Importantly, these teams don't wait for certainty. They act while actively managing uncertainty. Another important line of research comes from Gary Klein, who studied firefighters, military commanders, and emergency responders. And he found that in real-world high-stakes situations, leaders rarely compare multiple options analytically. Instead, they rely on pattern recognition built from experience while continuously testing whether the situation still fits the pattern they believe they're in. When it doesn't, effective leaders adjust quickly rather than defending the original interpretation. So bringing all this together, really, what we find is that when the plan breaks down, leadership is less about decisiveness and more about helping people, including ourselves, see clearly, speak honestly, and adapt together. Butch, I'm curious how that idea of decision-making played out between you, Captain Williams, the crew in orbit, mission control, all that. When information is incomplete and stakes are high, how did you decide the origin of decision-making? Who kind of was in charge?
That is established long before launch. The way I articulate it is we operate the spacecraft, we being the crew, for the ground control team, mission control. We operate it for them. When it comes to flying the spacecraft, hands-on, when it gets like it got with us, they support us in flying it. So it's mutual. It goes both ways depending on what's taking place. Everything, they are the boss, right? The ground control teams, the mission control teams, there's an army of people, programs that are developing the sequence of events and what will take place. Big picture with this International Space Station, then down to the vehicles, the spacecraft that come up, and certainly vehicles that are trying to develop the avenue to transport astronauts to and from, right? So this is what Starliner was. But when it comes down to operating, it's all them. We're operating for them. And we know what the flight plan is. We've talked about it. We discussed it. We prepared, and we know what all that entails. And if something goes awry, they have the say. Now, when it comes to flying the spacecraft, though, that's us. That's all us. Another example: flying the space shuttle, as an example. Operating the space shuttle in space, back when we flew the shuttle, that was the mission control. We did what they did. But when it came to landing it, we are on the controls. And they can give up some sugar calls. Hey, you're a little low at the 90, or you're a little low at the 180, as far as when you're coming around that final turn. It was called the heading alignment cone when you come in for landing. They can't do anything. It's all on us. So they can help us by giving us some sugar calls about position, but they can't do anything. They're supporting us in flying it. And there's critical junctures like that in this job that we do in human spaceflight. And when it comes to on the controls, like it was in the situation we were in, there was very little communication because there was such intense preparation leading up to the mission. We had a launch scrub for the launch in May of last year. Sonny and I flew back in a T-38. We came all the way back to Houston from Kennedy Space Center just to get in the sim with the rendezvous team. It'd been a while since we'd had a rendezvous sim, So we set up a simulation where we came back and did another training event, and then Ray and I got together several times while I was back. This engineer I mentioned earlier, and did more stuff in the simulator just for manual control, just to make sure our capabilities were at peak performance, right? So these are the types of things that we did. His main focus is on rendezvous. Knowing the whole spacecraft, the integration of the whole spacecraft, there's probably nobody that knew it better than me and Sonny and one of our engineers, Neil Nagata, as far as the overall integration of the entire spacecraft, everything. But there are certain capabilities of the spacecraft, avionics capabilities, different guidance, navigation, and control, rendezvous, other things, where there are people that know more in that area than me. I may know collectively integrated more about the spacecraft than anyone, but these individuals know more about their specific area than I do. And it's because of my position. If I said, hey, I got this, that's not the way we go about business. I respect their opinion, regardless of where they are in the chain, like you mentioned. Their opinion actually, not just respect it, I need it. I need to know what they think about any given situation, because they're the expert in their area. And then it's my position to integrate all that into everything else. So when Ray would say something, as an example, I listened and I heeded what he said, because he's the expert in that position, and add that to my bucket of capabilities, let's put it like that, right? Into my operations kind of mindset. And you do that with all those different areas. And that's something else that you learn going back all the way back to aircraft carriers, and trusting the people, like you said. You don't necessarily, it's not title, but it's the one that has the knowledge in a certain situation. And that's something that we inherently have to do in those really high-paced, dangerous areas of life that we find ourselves in, like on an aircraft carrier or in combat. Those the situations that lead to combat, those systems that give you that capability. So I know I'm saying a lot. Hopefully I'm answering your question sufficiently. So up and down the chain, yeah, I'm responsible for control of the spacecraft. They acquiesce to me to fly it, but I acquiesce to them to operate it, and learning from each individual is paramount in the success of the overall system and program.
I think it's pretty certain that most of the leaders, who are listening to this podcast aren't astronauts, have no experience with International Space Station, but they are dealing with uncertainty. Whether that's staffing shortages, budget pressures, unexpected disruptions, decisions without clear timelines. Based on your experience, what are 2 or 3 things that leaders should do immediately when they realize the plan no longer matches reality?
We kind of touched on it earlier. Depends on the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some situations dictate you got to act now. Other situations dictate you have some time. I tell you what, I'm a firm believer in surrounding myself with the sharp people in all areas that I have purview over, and almost be foolish not to, and listen to what they have to say. Listening is a big thing in leadership that hopefully most people have learned. Sometimes we learn it the hard way, but listening and heeding what the experts in various areas say and what their opinion is very, very important. But in certain situations, you don't have that luxury. Most situations you do, but there are some that you don't. And that's when that understanding, preparation, I'm not going to go in as the commander of a battle group, nor would I put someone in that position with a week of being there, without making sure that they are fully up to speed and ready to handle the overall situation. That's why we do handovers, like for any number of weeks or even months, handovers, where we get someone up to that level of being able to be in that position of leadership, because there are those situations that require you to make those decisions now. And so hopefully the process is in place. We'll get everyone in that position with sufficient knowledge and understanding to be able to make those hard decisions, quick and hard decisions. I'll give you a quick example. Combat. It's a Desert Storm, a long time ago. But I was in a 8-plane strike where we were going into a target area, and there was no air-to-air threat. The air-to-air threat had been diminished. So when we were going in and prosecuting a target, and first we had to refuel from the tanker. I was dash last. I was junior. When I got to the tanker was empty. It didn't have any gas. So the flight lead said, go to the next tanker that's going to give us gas after the mission. He's 300 miles south. Go rendezvous with him, get gas, and we'll see what the situation is when you catch up. So I did that. I went down, got gas, started screaming back up towards the border. They were checking out as I was getting up, 50 miles from the border. And the flight lead said, hey, there's really not a lot of threat in there. Go on in there and just drop your weapons in this area where we were. Just go in there in country. Let's go into combat in bad guy country alone. He said, go on in there and just drop your weapons, because you can't land on an aircraft carrier unless you're below a certain weight. And if you got all these weapons on, you're going to have to get rid of them. You would, we call it pickle, but you would release the weapon in a non-firing mode, and it would just land in the water and sink to the bottom. We don't want to do that. So if we can get rid of them before we get back to the carrier, that's good. So he told me to go in and just get rid of my weapons. He sends me into combat alone. That's not the right decision in any semblance of imagination. But this individual who was leading this strike shouldn't have been leading the strike to begin with. We all felt that. We all knew that. And then this situation comes up, and in an extreme situation, he says, "Hey," he's thinking, "Hey, you need to get your weapons off. We don't like to drop them in the Red Sea, like that. So yeah, go ahead and go in there and drop your weapons." Not a good call. Nothing. Obviously, I'm here. There was a threat that I had to take care of from the ground, and so his assessment that there was no threat in our area was not correct. He didn't have enough information data to make that call. He flew over the top and nothing happened when he was there, but that doesn't mean there's nothing there. Matter of fact, we knew there was something there based on our intelligence. They just didn't light up for them, so to speak. So he had information that he could have made the right decision, but he didn't. And nor was he in the position where he should have been in that position to be able to make that decision. And that's a pretty extremist situation, granted. But hopefully your listeners, take that and they say, hey, am I fully prepared in the position, in extremis, when times, I got to make a decision now to make the right call on a situation. If I'm not, I need to get there. And what do I need to do to get to that position?
But looking back now on your extended stay in the space station, how did that change the way you think about leadership, about life, about all those things?
Without going into all the details, there are some instances during the stay that if I could go back and change, I would. And I think that anyone that says otherwise in any given situation is not being completely honest. There's certain, again, we were safe, but as we were trying to analyze and assess what transpired, what happened, and then thinking about why it happened, there were times in certain situations where I did not say or do the right thing. I wish I could go back and change that. But there were other situations where I did do the right thing. And I basically, in a sense, felt like I had to lead the team from space. Again, knowing the systems, understanding not just the spacecraft systems, but the overarching space station, the requirements, what is hazardous in the space station environment and all of that. And knowing all of that helped to make some of those decisions. Again, there's some things, situations where I wish I'd handled them differently. And I think that happens in anyone's, but that's reflection, looking back, which is good, because in going forward in situations, I will learn from those and will hopefully help me assess and be a better decision maker, because you're always trying to bring people along. You don't want to stifle people, right? You want to bring them with you. And there's certain situations where some of my comments probably stifled a few, and I wish I could take some of those back.
And we all experience those. And if somebody's out there listening, they think they don't, they probably are as blind as one could be. But I guess following up on that, what did you learn about yourself through that experience?
That goes back to scripture again. Paul, if you go into, I think it's 1 Corinthians, he goes through a list of things that happened to him. He said he was beaten 5 times, 40 lashes minus 1, so 39 lashes. He was whipped. He was beaten with a rod 3 times. He was shipwrecked a day and a night in the sea. He was stoned once and left for dead. And he wasn't going, give me another lash. This is great. He wasn't that. I mean, he's dealing with the difficulty of the situation. But he said through all that, he knew he was exactly where the Lord would have him be, in and amongst all of those situations. And he said, because of that, I am content. I know how to abound. I know how to be abased. I know how to thrive. I know how to be, pulled back. And because of that, knowing that the Lord is in control, I am content. And you asked me what I learned from it. That's the biggest thing. It taught me even more that I'm not in control of this life. I'm not in control of the events. I have very little control over a lot of things. And being content in whatever the situation is where I need to be, because that contentment breeds contentment, right? It helps others be content in situations and learn from the situation that is at hand, and not being, quick to speak or quick to be upset or whatever. Contentment brings a calmness, and calmness in most situations is what needs to be taking place. I know in our situation, people say, were you afraid? I'm like, no, I wasn't afraid, because I was content. And fear is very healthy. Hey, fear keeps me from sticking my hand in the fire because I don't want to get burned. But fear in other situations is not beneficial. It's a deterrent, because it takes away our ability to focus and perform on the task that may mean life or death. And fear in those instances, like going into combat, when I was actually in the role of combat, I was not fearful. Now, leading up to it, when you're going south of the border, yeah, I was fearful because of thinking what could happen, what might happen. But in the moment, all that went away. Praise the Lord for that, because you can't have that in those moments, because it, not just your life, but other people's lives are dependent on you and your performance as well. So fear can be a detriment to that. Focused and relying on your preparation, the skills that you've honed, and in the moment, executing those is paramount. And that fear doesn't aid that in those situations.
Thanks for sharing that. I got one last question for you, but I can't let you get away from the podcast without the opportunity for us to recognize the role Tennessee Tech has played in our lives. And so, as a distinguished two-time graduate who has his own, Wilmore way that they, dedicated, that I think is beautiful. How has Tech shaped your life?
Wow. I often go back to those 4 years. I majored in electrical engineering and played football, and those are 2 full-time jobs. I mean, full-time, and nobody can do 2 full-time jobs. Neither could I. But to the best of my ability, I struggled through. And what I didn't know until reflecting back, my brain was a very stony place, and I had to beat things into my brain over and over and over again to remember. But over the course of time, when you only have so much time because of the tasks that you have bought into and trying to do the best in all those, my brain, and I didn't even know it at the time, became a little bit more of a sponge where I soak it in. I had to soak it in quick because I had to. I didn't have a choice when football and like I said, electrical engineering, because the Lord did not give me an immense amount of retaining knowledge capability, smartness. What he gave me a lot of, though, was determination. And that determination fueled into morphing because of the tech, the rigor of the schooling and the rigor of the sports as well, just developed me into an individual that I could take it in and remember things that I didn't even realize it was taking place until I was well into flight school and all my buddies were studying. And I'm going fishing because I knew what I needed to know about the aircraft and the boldface procedures and all that. And the only reason that was not me until Tennessee Tech made that part of me, which has been a benefit, ever since. So I attribute the rigor of the school itself, and much of what the Lord used that to mold the capability of this very weak mind into something that is still weak, but it has some good moments occasionally.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's a great way, I think, to end out a phenomenal conversation. Butch,
Thank you.
Really, thank you for being on the Science Leadership, and wings up.
Wings up.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly know the people you lead and how to build a great environment for success. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.